It was a quiet winter afternoon in Byron, Wyoming, a small, tight-knit town where neighbors knew each other by name. The air was cold, the kind that lingers heavy in the lungs, pressing down like an unseen weight. But inside one particular home, on a seemingly ordinary day, something happened that would send shockwaves far beyond this rural community. At 1:30 p.m., a call came into the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office. A woman's voice on the other end of the line, calm but strained. She reported a shooting. Officers rushed to the scene, unaware that what they were about to walk into was something they would never be able to forget. Inside, 4 young children, lifeless. A mother, barely clinging on. A crime so devastating that even seasoned investigators would struggle to make sense of it. Tranielle Harshman, 32 years old, had always been known as a devoted mother. She was described by those who knew her as a woman who fought tirelessly for her children, who protected them with everything she had. Yet, on February 10th, something inside her broke. Something so powerful, so overwhelming, that it led to an unthinkable act. What happened inside that home? How did a mother, who had spent her life shielding her children from harm, become the very thing she feared? Was this a moment of unbearable despair, a tragic culmination of years of struggle? Or was there something more, something that had been building, unseen, until it reached a point of no return? Tonight, we tell the story of Tranielle Harshman. A story of love, loss, and a battle that raged behind closed doors. But this isn't just a crime story. It's a story about the human mind, the depths of pain it can endure, and the ways in which society often fails those who need help the most. Before we begin, a warning. This story contains discussions of mental health struggles, domestic disputes, and the loss of young lives. If you or someone you know is struggling, please seek help. This is not just a story. It's a reminder that some battles are invisible, and that sometimes, those who appear the strongest are carrying the heaviest burdens. Now, let's begin. Long before the headlines, before the tragedy that would shake an entire community, there was a young girl growing up in the heart of Wyoming. Tranielle Harshman wasn't a name that stood out. She wasn't the type to make waves, nor was she someone who demanded attention. But for those who knew her, she was a fighter, resilient, loving, and determined. Tranielle was the third of 13 children. A big family, a loud household, and a life that was never truly quiet. In families that large, attention was spread thin, and it often fell on the older siblings to help raise the younger ones. From a young age, Tranielle understood responsibility. She learned how to soothe a crying baby, how to cook for a full table, how to exist in the middle of chaos without ever really being seen. But what was it like growing up in a family that big? For some, it builds a deep sense of connection, a feeling of never being alone. For others, it creates an invisible struggle, a quiet competition for affection, for recognition, for space to be something more than just one of many. No one knows exactly how Tranielle felt about her upbringing, but one thing was clear: she grew up fast. As she entered her teenage years, Tranielle became known for her caring nature. She was the kind of person who would drop everything to help someone in need, the kind of friend who would listen, the kind of daughter who took on more than was ever asked of her. But beneath it all, there were struggles no one could see. Tranielle suffered from polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, a condition that not only affected her physical health but also took a toll on her emotionally. The disorder brought with it intense pain, hormonal imbalances, and, at times, deep bouts of depression. But she pushed through. She didn't complain. She rarely asked for help. By the time she reached adulthood, Tranielle had a clear goal in mind. She wanted a family of her own. She wanted stability, love, and a home where she felt in control. That dream seemed to take shape when she met Quinn Blackmer. He was steady, responsible, and in many ways, the opposite of the chaotic world she had grown up in. The two married, and before long, they welcomed 2 daughters, Olivia and Braylee. For a while, life seemed to be falling into place. Tranielle was a mother now, and she poured everything she had into her children. Every sleepless night, every scraped knee, every whispered bedtime story, she was there. She was the mother she had always wanted to be. But life doesn't always unfold the way we hope. Tranielle's marriage to Quinn didn't last. The reasons remain unclear. Perhaps it was the stress of young parenthood, perhaps the weight of her own struggles became too much, or perhaps, like so many love stories, it simply faded. Whatever the case, Tranielle was left to rebuild. A single mother, balancing the demands of raising two daughters while fighting her own battles. But she wasn't one to give up. She still believed in love, in family, in the possibility of something better. And then she met Cliff Harshman. Cliff was different. He was charismatic, confident, someone who could walk into a room and take up space. He made Tranielle feel seen in a way she hadn't before. Before long, they were married, and once again, Tranielle's family grew. 2 more daughters were born, Brooke and Jordan. To the outside world, she had what she had always wanted. A home filled with laughter, the love of her children, a husband by her side. But behind closed doors, things were not as simple as they seemed. Motherhood is demanding. Raising 4 children is exhausting. And for someone struggling with PCOS and the weight of mental health challenges, those demands can become overwhelming. Tranielle was fighting battles no one could fully understand, and the weight of those battles was beginning to show. In moments of exhaustion, she confided in close friends. She spoke of the stress, of feeling stretched too thin, of the pain that never fully went away. But she always followed it up with a smile, a reassurance that she was fine, that she could handle it. But how much can one person handle before it becomes too much? Before the walls start to close in? Before the exhaustion turns into something darker? The life Tranielle had built, the love, the family, the future she had dreamed of, was beginning to crack. And no one knew just how deep those cracks ran. Custody battles are never just about the law. They are about pain, about loss, about the desperate attempt to hold on to the most precious thing in the world, your children. For Tranielle Harshman, the fight for her daughters was more than just legal proceedings. It was a battle that would push her to the edge. In the beginning, things were civil. After her divorce from Quinn Blackmer, the father of her first 2 daughters, Olivia and Braylee, a joint custody agreement was put in place. It wasn't perfect, but it worked, for a while. The girls would spend time with both parents, and despite the end of their marriage, Tranielle and Quinn managed to co-parent without open conflict. But custody agreements are fragile, especially when emotions remain raw. As time went on, the balance shifted. Quinn started to question whether joint custody was really in the best interest of their daughters. He believed he could provide them with a more stable home, a more structured environment. And so, he decided to fight for full custody. That decision changed everything. Tranielle found herself facing a legal battle she never expected. Court filings, lawyer meetings, custody evaluations. Every moment of her life was suddenly under a microscope. Every parenting decision she had ever made was being examined, questioned, picked apart. It wasn't just about what kind of mother she was. It was about proving, in legal terms, that she was good enough to keep her own children. The emotional weight was unbearable. To fight for custody, Tranielle needed money she didn't have. Legal fees began piling up. Every court appearance, every document filed, drained what little financial resources she had left. Bills went unpaid. Stress grew heavier. And with each passing day, her fear of losing her daughters became more real. But the battle wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in her mind. Tranielle had already struggled with her health for years. PCOS had drained her physically, leaving her exhausted, in pain, and constantly battling hormonal imbalances. But what few people understood was the toll it took on her mental health. The condition is often linked to anxiety, depression, and mood swings. And for a woman already stretched thin, those struggles only deepened. Then came postpartum depression. After giving birth to her younger daughters, Brooke and Jordan, something inside her shifted. The exhaustion was no longer just physical, it was emotional, mental. Some days felt impossible. The weight of motherhood, the stress of a blended family, the endless pressure to be everything for everyone, it was too much. And now, on top of it all, she was fighting for her children in a courtroom that didn't seem to care about the battles she was already facing. Tranielle's anxiety worsened. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Some nights, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Would they take her children from her? Would she wake up one day and find that she had lost everything? Her world began shrinking. Friends noticed she wasn't as talkative, that her once warm smile had faded. She stopped reaching out, stopped asking for help. And then, something shifted again. The custody hearings became more intense. Accusations were made. Words were said in court that couldn't be taken back. Tranielle's mental health became part of the case against her. Every struggle, every bad day, every moment of exhaustion was presented as evidence that she was unfit to be a mother. She was losing control. She had fought so hard to hold on to her children, to keep her family together. But now, the walls were closing in. The life she had built, the one thing that had ever truly mattered to her, was slipping through her fingers. And no one could see just how much she was struggling. No one knew how much longer she could keep fighting. February 10th was supposed to be an ordinary day. But from the moment Tranielle Harshman woke up that morning, something was different. The weight of everything, her custody battle, her declining mental health, her overwhelming exhaustion, had reached its breaking point. For weeks, she had felt it pressing down on her, suffocating her. She had tried to push through, to keep going, to pretend that things would get better. But now, as she moved through the motions of the morning, something had shifted. No one would have known. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. There were no screams, no outward signs of distress. Just another morning in a quiet neighborhood. Inside the house, the four girls, Olivia, Braylee, Brooke, and Jordan, were at home with their mother. What happened next would leave a community in shock and a family shattered beyond repair. At 1:30 p.m., a 911 call came through to emergency dispatch. The voice on the other end was quiet, almost emotionless. It was Tranielle. Her words were brief, but they carried a weight that sent a chill through the dispatcher. "They're gone," she said. A pause. "I'm sorry." And then the line went dead. For a moment, the dispatcher sat frozen. Something about the call felt wrong. It wasn't the panicked voice of someone reporting an accident. It wasn't the desperate pleas of someone in distress. It was final. Officers were immediately dispatched to the address. As they approached the home, there were no outward signs of anything unusual. The front yard was still. The house stood quiet. But the moment they stepped inside, everything changed. What they found inside was something no first responder could ever prepare for. In the bedroom, 3 of Tranielle's daughters, Braylee, Brooke, and Jordan, were lifeless. The room was eerily silent, a sharp contrast to the horror that had unfolded just moments before. Then, they found Olivia. She was still alive. Barely. Paramedics worked quickly, rushing her to the hospital, clinging to the hope that she might survive. But the injuries were severe. The damage had already been done. She fought for 5 more days, slipping in and out of consciousness, before finally taking her last breath. And then there was Tranielle. They found her in another room, barely clinging to life. A failed attempt to end her own suffering. She was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was too great. A few days later, she was gone. In less than a week, an entire family had been wiped out. The weight of what had happened sent shockwaves through the community. Friends, neighbors, and loved ones struggled to process the horror of what had unfolded behind closed doors. People searched for answers. For something, anything, that could explain why a mother would do this to the very children she had fought so hard to keep. But the truth was, the answers weren't simple. Because sometimes, the most devastating tragedies don't come with easy explanations. The news spread fast. It always does in a small town. Whispers turned into gasps. Questions turned into shock. And before long, the entire community was left grasping for answers. How could something like this happen? How could a mother, someone who had spent her entire life protecting her children, be responsible for their deaths? For those who knew Tranielle Harshman, the tragedy was impossible to understand. This wasn't just another news story. These were real children. A real mother. A real family. And now they were gone. Nicole Jensen, one of Tranielle's closest friends, was one of the first to speak out. To her, Tranielle wasn't just another name in a tragic headline. She was a mother who loved her daughters more than anything in the world. She was a fierce mama bear, Nicole said in an interview, her voice breaking. If there was one thing she was, it was protective. She lived for those girls. Everything she did, every decision she made, was about them. Nicole had seen Tranielle struggle. The exhaustion, the stress, the constant fight to hold her family together. She had heard the frustration in Tranielle's voice when she talked about the court battles, the financial strain, the overwhelming feeling that she was losing control of her own life. But never, not once, did she think it would end like this. Then there was Cliff Harshman, Tranielle's second husband, the father of her two youngest daughters. He had been married to her for years, had built a life with her, had watched her go from a young woman full of love and energy to someone drowning under the weight of her circumstances. When he got the call, he refused to believe it. Even when reality sank in, he still couldn't accept it. "This wasn't her," he said quietly. "It couldn't be. She loved them more than anything." His voice cracked as he spoke about their daughters, Brooke and Jordan. He couldn't say their names without breaking down. The pain of knowing they were gone, knowing he hadn't been there to stop it, was unbearable. For Quinn Blackmer, Tranielle's first husband, the grief came with an added weight. Because, unlike others, he had seen the warning signs. And he had tried to stop this before it happened. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Quinn had been fighting for full custody of Olivia and Braley. He had seen the emotional toll the court battles had taken on Tranielle. He had heard her cries for help, had read her desperate messages, had listened as she told him she was struggling. But no matter how many times he tried to intervene, to get someone to take her mental health seriously, it was never enough. She needed help, Quinn said. And she didn't get it. In the end, his daughters were gone. And no amount of warnings, no amount of legal action, no amount of trying to do the right thing had been enough to save them. The town was in mourning. People left flowers and stuffed animals outside the house, their faces full of grief and confusion. Candlelight vigils were held, with hundreds gathering to honor the lives lost. Strangers wept for children they had never met. Parents held their own children a little tighter. Everyone wanted to understand. Everyone wanted an answer. But no matter how many times they asked, the truth remained the same. No one saw this coming. And no one would ever forget. In the days following the tragedy, the questions began to shift. People weren't just asking why this happened. They were asking how it could have been prevented. How does a mother, drowning under the weight of her struggles, slip through the cracks? How does someone so deeply in pain reach a breaking point without anyone stopping it? For Tranielle Harshman, the warning signs had been there for years. Some close to her saw them, but too often they were dismissed, misunderstood, or simply ignored. One of the biggest battles Tranielle faced was against something invisible, something inside her own body. Polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, is a condition that affects millions of women, but what many don't realize is that it isn't just about hormonal imbalances or difficulty with pregnancy. It comes with a high risk of mental health struggles, anxiety, depression, mood swings. Studies have shown that women with PCOS are far more likely to experience suicidal thoughts. Their hormones are constantly shifting, their bodies feel like they're betraying them, and many struggle with overwhelming emotional highs and lows. For a mother like Tranielle, who was already carrying the weight of so much, custody battles, financial strain, a failing support system, this was just another fight she had to face alone. And then there was postpartum depression, the silent thief that creeps in after childbirth. For some, it's mild, a feeling of sadness that fades with time. But for others, it becomes unbearable, a darkness that lingers, whispering things no mother wants to hear. It tells them they aren't enough, that their children deserve better, that there's no way out. The statistics are alarming. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in new mothers. But despite this, postpartum depression is often brushed aside. Friends and family assume it's just exhaustion, that it will pass. Doctors offer medication but rarely a real solution. And the mothers who are suffering, many are too ashamed to ask for help, afraid of being seen as unfit, afraid of losing their children. For Tranielle, the custody battle only made things worse. Legal fights over children can be brutal. They drain a person financially, mentally, and emotionally. Every court date is a reminder of what's at stake. Every document filed is another layer of stress. And when accusations start flying, when one parent is painted as unfit, unstable, or incapable, it takes an even greater toll. Experts have studied the effects of custody battles on parents, and the findings are clear. The stress can lead to severe depression. The constant fear of losing a child can drive a parent to extreme actions. And when a mother already struggling with mental health is pushed to her limit, the consequences can be devastating. In Tranielle's case, the system failed her in more ways than one. She needed real help, not just legal battles. She needed someone to see her pain, to step in before it was too late. She needed resources that so many struggling mothers don't have: affordable therapy, community support, intervention before tragedy strikes. This case isn't just a story. It's a warning. There are thousands of parents out there just like Tranielle. Mothers who are exhausted, overwhelmed, fighting battles that no one else sees. Some of them are barely holding on. Some of them are running out of options. And the question remains, how many more tragedies like this will it take before something changes? Tranielle Harshman's story is one that leaves people searching for answers, turning over every detail, every moment, every decision that led to that final, irreversible tragedy. A mother of 4, once filled with love for her children, now forever remembered for an act that no one could have imagined. But this case is more than just a headline. It's more than just another tragic story in the long history of true crime. It is a reflection of something much deeper, something that happens far too often but is rarely spoken about until it's too late. The truth is, Tranielle's struggle did not begin on February 10th. It began years before, maybe even decades. A slow build-up of stress, pain, and isolation. She wasn't just battling for custody. She wasn't just fighting financial struggles. She was fighting her own mind. And in the end, it became a fight she could no longer endure. But what if someone had noticed? What if someone had stepped in before that breaking point? What if there had been more resources, more support, more understanding? We don't know if it would have changed the outcome. But we do know that thousands of mothers, fathers, and struggling individuals are facing the same invisible battles every day. Some are barely holding on. Some are afraid to ask for help. Some are waiting for someone to notice before it's too late. This case forces us to ask hard questions, not just about Tranielle, but about the way society treats mental health. How many people slip through the cracks? How many cries for help go unanswered? How many tragedies could be prevented if the stigma surrounding mental health was finally broken? Tranielle Harshman's story should never have ended this way. Her children should still be here. She should still be here. But the reality is, we can't change what happened. What we can do is learn from it. If you or someone you love is struggling, there is help. You are not alone. Talk to someone. Reach out. The weight you carry doesn't have to be carried alone. And if this case has taught us anything, it's that silence can be deadly. Conversations about mental health need to happen, not just after tragedy strikes, but before. This is not just a story. This is a call to action. If this case moved you, if it made you think, if it made you question how we can do better, then let's talk about it. Share this story. Start conversations. Because awareness is the first step toward change. And for those still fighting battles no one else can see, you are not alone. Help is out there. All you have to do is reach for it. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Your engagement helps bring more awareness to cases like this. Stay safe, take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next story.